As the kids go back to their pews, I want to let you know that with July 4th being on a Sunday and with people getting vaccinated and making plans, we had no idea who was going to show up here on Sunday. We really thought all of y'all would just be somewhere else at times, and we would just be waving the whole hour to the people watching online. So it's very heartwarming to see you all here, and thank you very much for worshiping with us today. So when I was young, my dad and I would watch the Atlanta Braves every night on WTBS, the Superstation. Now, Dad was a big fan of the announcing crew, Pete Van Wieren, Ernie Johnson, Skip Carey, and Don Sutton. And looking back, those announcers played a part in my going into sports radio as a profession. But there was one announcer my dad could not stand, John Sterling, who would go on to be the voice of the New York Yankees for well over 30 years, still doing it. So he's done well for himself. But my dad didn't like him. Now, my dad liked everybody, so when he said he didn't like you, something was going on. And he would share his disapproval whenever Sterling was calling a game. Finally, I had had enough of my dad's tirades, so I said, "But Dad, he's trying." Well, that stopped him cold. He didn't say another bad word about John Sterling again, well, at least out loud. And it was many years later that I had my own John Sterling moment. Kristen, my wife, and I were walking out of Walmart when I happened to see a woman park in a handicapped parking spot. She had a tag, but when she got out, she walked right into the store. Now, handicapped parking has always meant a lot to me because my dad had polio. He couldn't walk without the assistance of crutches and scooters. So those designated spots were really helpful. But when I saw that person get out and walk into the store, well, that made me mad. I can't believe she parked in that spot, and she walked right into the store. I bet there's not even anything wrong with her. Well, that's when my wife had enough of my tirade, and she said, "You don't know what she might have. She could have cancer, and she isn't 100% anymore. Sure, she can walk, but it doesn't mean she is pain-free." Well, that stopped me cold. Once again, Kristen proved how much smarter than me she is. Well, the next week, her point was proven when at the church we held our monthly Open Arms Cancer Recovery Group. And I noticed that while everyone could walk into the meeting, they all had handicapped parking tags on their cars. And I knew just how sick they had been or were. Now, what those two stories reflect is something that we don't seem to have a lot of these days: empathy. Now, sometimes we confuse empathy with sympathy, but they are two totally different things. Dr. Scott Cormode is a professor at Fuller University, and he explains it this way: sympathy is feeling something about someone else. It's abstract and detached, and it's a bit self-centered, because it's all about how their situation makes us feel and not about how the situation makes them feel. Empathy is feeling with that person. It is personal and engaged. I believe our lack of empathy has damaged us as a country and as Christians. On this day where we can reflect, celebrate, and consider our independence from British authority, we also must reconsider our independence from one another. While we believe in our own individual rights, we no longer believe in the rights or the stories of each other, which puts us in the same dilemma as the people in our gospel from Mark. The people have stopped listening to Jesus. They don't believe him. For this, Jesus is amazed at their unbelief. And that's not a good thing. Today, we still believe, we still have faith, but it's not in Jesus. Today, our faith is in Tucker Carlson, Rachel Maddow, Sean Hannity, Joy Reid, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, conservative politicians, liberal politicians, conspiracy website communities like QAnon. The Public Religion Research Institute, which is a nonpartisan and nonprofit organization, found that an estimated 15% of Americans believe in QAnon, which makes that community as popular as some major religions. Why is that? Why do we put more faith and belief in what humans and websites say than we do Jesus? Because these talking heads and message boards put all the blame for our woes on the other. Whatever bad has happened in this country, whatever bad has happened in our lives, it's no longer our fault, but theirs. And no matter what side of the political spectrum these talking heads and websites fall under, they amazingly use the same tactic: fear. Yesterday, I was watching Disney's Zootopia with Maddie for about the 35th time this week. And there's one character who said that fear always works. Fear always works. Now think about it. When you watch these shows, and I know you do, you watching online, I know you do, when the program ends, when have you ever felt better about life? When did you last say, man, I am so glad I watched that show. I feel so much better about everything. In fact, I'm going to sing a song right now. No, most of the time, if not all the time, we say, I can't believe they got away with it. Again, they must be stopped. Fear always works. And it makes money. Not for us, but for the talking heads and for the networks and advertisers. People are making money off of our fear. People are making money off of our unbelief. To quote God from our first passage, we have turned into a nation of rebels. We are stubborn and we are rude. Think about if you have seen, and you probably have, no matter what channel you watch, you have probably seen videos of people yelling at each other, cursing at each other, fighting one another, or fighting innocent people, beating them up, yelling things like, go back home, or you are part of a conspiracy, or you're teaching something that I don't like. We are stubborn and we are rude. And while we are mired in an independence of each other, we have stopped being dependent on Jesus. We have stopped being dependent on Jesus because we have been convinced that Jesus is not enough. We have been convinced by the talking heads on TV and in social media, and we've even heard it from pulpits around the nation that Jesus is not enough. There has to be more. Paul writes in our second lesson how God's grace is sufficient. It is enough. We say that today. We sing it. We pray it. But while our words say one thing, our actions show another. Our actions show that our answers do not lie in Jesus, but in the works of people. False idols. False idols who tell stories. Stories that are not meant for us to understand one another, but to hate one another and to fear one another. I would say that Jesus is amazed at our unbelief. And yet, What does Jesus do when confronted with unbelief? What happens after his confrontation with his hometown in our gospel? Jesus taught. He called on his disciples to proclaim healing and repentance. Jesus went out to show the people that fear will not win. Fear cannot win. Because even while people did not believe, Jesus taught everyone. Jesus welcomed everyone. Jesus invited everyone. Jesus loved everyone. He suffered, he died, he saved everyone. Jesus saved everyone. Jesus won our independence from sin's authority. Jesus won our independence from sin's authority. And Jesus continues to save us today. Jesus saves us even in our time of unbelief. Jesus saves us even when we have turned our attention to ourselves and not to one another. Because our freedom has been won. And today we can proclaim our independence from evil and pledge our dependence on Christ. And we can pledge our dependence on Christ by doing 3 things immediately. Number 1, turn off the talking heads. Turn them off. Turn them off. Turn off the radio. Maybe step away from social media once in a while. Go away from Twitter because you feel like you have to prove somebody wrong, which never works. Turn off the talking heads and turn on the real world. Talk with your family. Call your friends. And as we open up, go to a movie. Break bread with one another. Ask your family and friends how their day was. Turn off the false idols. Number 2, turn away from ourselves and to our neighbors. Get involved with our Monday night feedings, family promise, the clothing closet, the feast gathering, the quilters, the prayers group ministry, because these ministries do one thing we need a lot of. These ministries help tell the stories of other people. They help us learn their names and their lives. We learn about people who are hurting and suffering and looking for Christ and for a community that tells them that they matter. Number 3, and this is my big one, turn up the nice. When you go out, look at the people around you, and when you go to a store, when you go into a restaurant or and you talk to the server, call them by their name. Ask them about their day. Put yourself in their shoes. Talk to them, not at them. Have a real conversation. I know firsthand, then when you treat the person as a person, the service is a little bit better. But I don't do it to get better service. I do it to show them that they matter. They are real people with real jobs, hard jobs, and they need to be acknowledged. All 3 steps of these dependent actions do the same thing. They create empathy. They create the stories we need to hear. They create the stories of our African American friends who have been harassed, stories of police who have been threatened, stories of LGBTQIA people who are looking for somewhere, anywhere to call home, stories of the immigrant who wants to start a new life, or of the child locked in a cage thinking that they will never see their parents again. Stories of the soldier fighting for our freedom. Stories of the teenager who thinks ending her life will make things so much better for everyone. Stories of the prisoner wanting a second chance. Stories of the widower having to deal with the silence of a now empty home. Stories of the spouse watching as their beloved slowly fades away to a long-term debilitating illness. Stories of the parents or the single parent who has to juggle work, full-time daycare, full-time online school, who needs to know that we know that they are doing an amazing job. Stories of people who need to be heard and who need to be seen. When we see and hear, we put others before ourselves, and we stop believing in fear. That is what we call grace. Grace is the most powerful gift that can ever be bestowed upon us. God's grace overthrows the false idols. God's grace overpowers fears. And God's grace overwhelms us to the point that God's grace is unfailing, it is strong, it is steadfast, and God's grace is sufficient. Happy Dependence Day.